Hey guys, it's Will. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new, welcome and thank you for finding us. It's October. Hell yes, that means it's Halloween season. That means we all get to watch horror movies. This is one of the times of year I look forward to the most as a huge fan of movies. October, when I get to watch horror movies. The only other time of year that I like just as much in terms of themed movies is Christmas, because I love watching Christmas movies. So October always gets me really excited. And this year, actually, I started planning my October watching in God, I want to say like mid-August. I started getting really excited, and like 2 months in advance, I started planning what I was going to be watching. It's just really, really fun. So I thought it would be fun to rank the three big slasher movie franchises as a Halloween thing for this year. So Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, and of course, what we're talking about today, the Friday the 13th series. So this is the big one for me. I know that everyone has a different of these three big slasher series. I know that each series means different things to different people based on like when you first encountered them, who you were watching them with, like when in your life you discovered them and stuff like that. I first saw a Jason movie when I was like, I think like 7, when I was way too young to be seeing a Jason movie. And just the hockey mask, like the knife, just like the violence of it, like it just really, really left an impression on me. And when I got older and I started watching more like slasher movies and horror movies and stuff, I kind of gravitated towards the Friday the 13th films, and I went through them all. And I think I've watched the entire series like 3 or 4 times, and I'm currently going through it again this Halloween. This is part of my October viewing this year, so I'm really excited to rank these movies. And I will say one thing before I get into this video, which is that Freddy vs. Jason is not on this list. There's really 2 reasons for it. One is that it's not, because it's a crossover movie, I don't really know where to put it. Like, do you rank it with the Friday the 13th movies, or do you rank it with the Nightmare on Elm Street movies? And I don't want to put it on both lists because that would be weird. And so I just decided to leave it off. The other reason is that I saw that movie when it first came out, and I don't think I've seen it since then. So honestly, all I remember is the ending, like the very, very end, which if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. I'm thinking of maybe doing a review of that movie on Halloween this year as like my impressions upon rewatching it for the first time in like 20 years or whatever. I think it came out like 20 years ago, right? And just kind of talking about it and how I feel about it, how I relate to it after not having seen it for so long. So there are 11 films on this list, and we're going to jump right into it. So number 11 on my ranking of the Friday the 13th franchise, I have Friday the 13th Part 5. I love this series, really love this series, and I can confidently say that I think this movie is awful. Like, this movie is so bad that, like, as I remember the first time I watched it, and I was like, what is this movie? I was like looking, I rented it from the video store. I think it was on VHS. And I remember looking at the case and being like, am I watching the movie I thought I rented? Like, what is this movie? And then I rewatched it like a decade later, because I remember hating it. So I stayed away from it. And I rewatched it like a decade later, and I was like, this movie is maybe even worse than I remember it being. Now, I haven't gotten to it yet in my rewatch of the series, but suffice it to say, I'm not really looking forward to it. I am going to watch it, but so I don't want to spoil the movie. If you haven't seen the movies, I guess I don't really want to give a spoiler, but there's something about this movie where you're like, why is it even a part of this series? And it doesn't, like, maybe they were trying to do something different. And like, I have to say, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, I love that movie. So like, I am all for a slasher franchise being like, let's try something else. But in this case, they were like, let's try something else. And that something else happened to be just like an absolute sack of crap. That's all I really have to say about that movie. At number 10 on my ranking of the Friday the 13th franchise, I have Jason X. Appropriate, since it's number 10 and it was the 10th movie in the series. It's probably really pronounced Jason 10, right? Because it's the Roman numeral 10, and I get that, but it looks like Jason X on the poster. This movie it has some parts of it that are really funny. Like, it's a movie that is aware of how stupid it is. And because of that, I mean, it's literally about Jason in space. Like, it has this sense of its own preposterousness, right? And that makes it mildly entertaining. It's also just not very good. Like, it's not like a full-blown, awesome, hysterical satire of its own stupidity. It just has self-aware moments but it also has moments that are kind of just not very well done and not very interesting and good. For me personally, now obviously, if your favorite film in the series is Part Five, or if your favorite film in the series is Jason 10, Jason Goes to Space, then good, and I'm happy for you. And this is just this is not, I'm not, it's all, when I say it's awful, I mean it's awful to me. You might really like it, and I don't want to prevent you from liking it, but like I said, Jason 10, it's like some of it is genuinely funny and like laugh out loud funny. There's a couple scenes in particular that are really funny, but the movie as a whole, I just don't find that compelling. So that's why I put it on there. Like if you think about the idea of like a slasher movie in space, like if you really went for it, if you did like the Andy Sidaris version, or if you did like the Paul Verhoeven like RoboCop version of it, it could be awesome. But it's just kind of like mildly entertaining. So at number 9 on my ranking of the Friday the 13th film franchise, I have the remake, which came out in 2009. It's just a fun movie, honestly. Like, I think they did a good job. They paid homage to various films throughout the series. It's a good slasher movie. Like, it's kind of dark and creepy, and it's pretty violent, brutal, but it also is very self-aware and has like some very silly humor in it. And it's not like the best movie ever made, but I think in terms of like if you look at the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, which I'll talk about when I do the Nightmare on Elm Street list, I think this movie is much more successful than that. This movie did not become like a hit beyond the series, right? Like it didn't reignite the franchise. It's not like the Halloween movie from, was it 2018, when they did the new Halloween series, and that actually kind of like caught a mainstream audience and became like a bona fide hit. This movie, I think, was more just it just appealed to people who were already fans of the franchise or fans of horror movies and slasher movies in general. It didn't break out beyond that, but I think it's a good movie, like as a piece of the franchise and paying homage to the franchise and trying to like create a version of it for that era to contemporary tastes, but staying true to what the movies are. I think it did a good job. Every movie on this list that I'm going to talk about moving forward is a movie I like. So even if it seems like it's low on the list, I enjoy all of these films. So you shouldn't think of me saying, oh, like this one's like number 9, very low. It's not a good movie. No, it's very fun. It's just not, I don't like it as much as the other ones. So at number 8, appropriately, again, I didn't realize I had done this multiple times on this list. We have Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. This movie has one of the best kills in the entire franchise, which is when a guy tries to box with Jason, and it goes about as well as you would expect it to go if someone is boxing with Jason. And it takes place on a rooftop too, which is fun. So rooftop boxing with Jason Voorhees, that is not on my bucket list. If it's on yours, let me know in the comments. Oh, and also let me know what your ranking is of the series in the comments. I totally forgot to mention that at the top of the video. But so the plot of this movie is like high school graduates on a boat. They're supposedly in upstate New York, but it's very obviously like Vancouver or Washington. They've got these like freaking enormous dramatic mountains behind them, but they're supposedly taking a boat down from upstate New York to New York City, and then Jason is on the boat, and what you would expect to happen with Jason trapped on a boat with a bunch of randy teenagers then happens, and some of the teenagers survive and they get to New York, and so you get to see Jason going through Times Square in the late 1980s and fun stuff like that. So, I mean, to me, this is just like, it's a trashy Jason movie, but it's a fun Jason movie. Like, a lot of people get killed. There's some really ridiculous scenes. There's some really funny stuff. There's some stuff that's kind of boring. Like, it's just a good, trashy, fun slasher movie that's like fun to watch with friends that has some good kills in it. So at number 7 on my list, I have Jason Goes to Hell. This is a very good movie. I really like this movie. And it was hard for me to know exactly where to put this film on the list. And I'll explain what, so this film and the film above it, I struggled with how to rank them. And so I'll explain a little bit, talking about this movie and the next movie, why I decided to rank them as I did. But if you haven't seen this film, and this is not a spoiler because this is basically like the whole setup of the movie, essentially what happens is the essence of Jason goes into a different body. And then throughout the film, the essence of Jason just keeps moving, like from body to body to body. So like multiple people are kind of embodying Jason Voorhees. And so it's this kind of like crazy concept sci-fi movie. Rather than like a straight slasher film where you have like a Freddy or a Jason or a Michael Myers, you have this unseen essence that's like leaping bodies, and so anyone around you could be like the murderer. And it's got a lot of really fun scenes in it. It's got some really gory kills in it. It's got references to the Evil Dead series because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Sam Raimi produced this movie. So it's got like props from the Evil Dead series in the movie, and so there's like fan theories about whether or not that means that there's like official crossover between those series and stuff like that. So it's a fun movie, and it's entertaining. It's violent. It's a good like gory, nasty slasher film. Now, also understand with my perspective that like I don't like extreme horror movies. They're just too, well, it's not that I don't like them. I just can't watch them. They're like too much for me. Like it's hard for me to watch them. So like zombie movies are probably like the goriest, nastiest movies I watch. Like the Fulci zombie or like that kind of stuff. Or like, you know, there's like the famous eye stabbing scene and like people are getting eaten and ripped open and there's blood geysering everywhere. And like, but like really, really nasty like torture porn or like you know, like the Terrifier movies or like Cannibal Holocaust. Like I can't watch those movies; they're too much for me. So slasher movies are perfect for me because I love the ambiance of them, and the goriness is like the right amount of goriness for my personal taste. So when I say this is a gory movie, and if say you haven't seen it, but you're like a fan of Cannibal Holocaust, you'll probably watch this movie and be like, "Why isn't this rated PG-13?" But to me, it's gory, so it's fun. So at number 6, I have Friday the 13th Part 7. So this is the movie where a young woman with psychic abilities is basically fighting Jason. Some people really don't like this movie because it kind of mixes up the mythology, where instead of just having Jason being like, you know, the supernatural element, the kind of like bad guy who will never die, and then you have just like a group of kids or a group of people he's going around killing or whatever, you introduce someone with psychic powers who can then fight Jason, right? From what I understand, this was actually originally 2 different movies. They wrote a script about this young woman who has psychic abilities, and then somehow it ended up in the hands of the people who were producing the Jason series, and they're like, why don't we just stick them together and we could do something new, and we could have a young woman who has these powers fighting Jason. That could bring like an interesting new element to the series, because then we have someone who has powers fighting him, not just these helpless people. To me, that makes this a really interesting entry in the series, because you kind of have like I said, like kind of like 2 films going out at the same time, 2 kind of different genres, right? Of like the Firestarter, whatever, like Stranger Things type of like psychic person, psychic powers, telekinesis type of movie. And then you have like the straight ahead slasher film, and they're kind of like stuck together in a way that I think is really cool. The reason I put this one ahead of Jason Goes to Hell, because I would rank these about the same, honestly. I didn't want to do any ties on this list because I felt like it was cheating if I just did like, oh, and we have a tie and another tie, another tie. Because there's a couple spots on this list where I really wanted to do a tie, but I was like, no, I'm gonna rank it for real. I'm not gonna do any ties. This movie is in the continuum of like the original 8 movies from the 1980s, and then there's like a gap for before Jason Goes to Hell came out, and then there's another big gap before Jason X came out. So this movie is much more like, in terms of the vibes, if you want to call it that, like the ambiance of it, the look of it, the feel of it, it's much more in keeping with like the initial run of films in the 80s. That's why I ranked it ahead of Jason Goes to Hell, even though honestly I could really pick either one of them depending on the moment. So that was number 6. So number 5 on my ranking of the Friday the 13th franchise, I have Part 3. This is just a really solid, really, really good Friday the 13th movie that has randy teenagers and a dude in a hockey mask killing people, and it's got some really silly humor in it. It's like a little bit corny. So to me, that in a way that takes a little bit away from it. That's why I didn't rank it higher than where I did, because some of the humor is like, it's like a little too corny. It kind of like undermines the scariness of it. But I mean, quite frankly, I don't think any of these movies are scary. It scared the crap out of me when I was like 7 years old. But as an adult, I don't find these movies scary at all. They're just really fun. But like the ambiance of it is kind of undermined by the silly humor. But it's got like everything that you would expect to be in a Jason movie. And it's just a really fun film. This was the one that they shot in 3D originally. So there's like certain shots in it where you can see that they are intended to be in 3D, if I'm not mistaken. I think this is the 3D one, right? Yeah. It's just a fun movie. And I think this is the first one where he appears in the hockey mask as well, because in the first 2, that is not the case. So that was number 5. So at number 4 on my ranking of the Friday the 13th series, I have the original Friday the 13th from 1980. I used to rank this really low on my list. I think I've seen it like 3 or 4, probably 4 times before. And then a couple years ago, I watched it again in October, looking for Halloween movies to watch, and I really loved it because what struck me about it is that it's kind of like this really good comedy drama coming of age movie about these teenagers. Like if you took Jason out of this movie would work as like a coming of age, almost like Dazed and Confused type of movie about these kids at a summer camp. They're not really kids, they're like the counselors, right? At a summer camp, and they're just like drinking and doing drugs, and they're flirting with each other, and there's like maybe they're gonna have sex, maybe they're not. They're like getting up to no good, and they're like, it works really well character wise. And then you add the element of the killer, and that takes it to a different place, and it makes it a very different film, but it still works as a character piece, and it works as a slasher movie. Now, I don't, like I said, I'm trying not to spoil anything about the series, but suffice it to say, the bad guy in this movie is not who you think it is. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say about it. I'm trying not to spoil stuff here. So now we're into the top 3. So at number 3 on my ranking of the Friday the 13th franchise, I have Part 2. This is a really good movie. This is a really good movie. To me, this is the movie that established the series because it deviates from the first film and it sets up the template for what will essentially be every Friday the 13th movie going forward. I think that if this movie did not do what it did and was not successful at what it did, the franchise would not exist. So in a way, I think you could say this is far and away the most important film in the franchise. Like we would not have 12 movies with Jason Voorhees plus all of this fan culture and, you know, like fan films and like all of the, you know, the t-shirts and the, I have a big like cup, like a Friday the 13th cup with Jason's big face on it, like the keychains, all of them. That stuff would not exist were it not for this film. I think this is really like the most important one in this series. And it's a really, really fun movie. It's got really good characters. It's got a really great opening scene. I think it's very satisfying and very interesting. And it's very interesting the way they decide to kind of do something different with this entry in the series. Because if you look at these films, like if you look at Halloween, right, which predates the Friday the 13th series, in the first 3 Halloween movies, you could see them not really knowing where to go moving forward. And then they start to kind of what's really interesting to me actually is that with Halloween 4 and 5, they're almost like Jason movies in the Halloween franchise. Like they're very, very similar to Friday the 13th movies. So you could see that I mean, this is just my kind of perspective on it, my like whatever fan theory or whatever, but I think that the Friday the 13th series did a much better job of establishing what it was in this second film so that it could continue forward at like this furious pace of like a film a year and be successful and have a really strong identity. Whereas the Halloween series, and again, this is because John Carpenter didn't want to do like a bunch of stupid sequels. He wanted to do something more interesting, and they were experimenting a little bit and stuff like that, right? So it's not really a discredit to Halloween, but you could see that Friday the 13th knew exactly what to do with that second film and how to move a franchise forward like that. And it was really successful for it. I think its success is not only due to how they made the film, but the fact that the film is very, very good. So now we get into my top 2. It was very hard for me to rank these. I almost did a tie for number 1, but I was like, it's cheating. I can't do a tie. So at number 2 on my list of the Friday the 13th franchise, or rather my ranking of the Friday the 13th franchise, I have Part 4, which is called The Final Chapter, I believe. And all these films have other titles, right? But I just like The New Blood, and like I just to me they're just parts 1 through 10. Basically, that's how I think of them. So that's just how that's how I talk about them with friends and stuff like that. And since we're all friends, I thought that's how I would do this video. Friday the 13th Part 4 to me is the Jason movie. Like it is the quintessential. Like if you were thinking of what a great Friday the 13th movie is, it's this movie. It's the best one in terms of being like a straight ahead, awesome slasher movie with really good characters and interesting story. and like brutal, gory, innovative killing in it, like really good makeup and effects and stuff like that. Like a really great like 80s slasher movie, like ambiance, great vibes. This is exactly that movie. Like it is the pinnacle of the series in terms of it being like just an awesome, badass, like quintessential, indispensable slasher movie. It's like, to me, this movie is really like the perfect slasher movie, and I would put this in the top tier of like the all-time best, greatest, most amazing slasher movies. So now you might be wondering, if I'm saying all this stuff is the greatest movie ever, blah, 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 why isn't it number one on my list? And number one on my list, I have Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Why do I have this one on here? It's really kind of a two-parter. This is in a way like a perfect movie to me, because this movie is a really good slasher film. Like I would put this up alongside Friday the 13th Part 4 in terms of its success as a slasher film. Like it has a really fun setup. It's got really fun characters. It's got some really good kills in it, and some of them are very innovative and like interesting. But the thing that takes this movie over the top to me and makes it my absolute favorite of the series is that this film is also a satire of slasher movies. It's almost like Scream before Scream, or like, Wes Craven's New Nightmare before Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Like in the 90s, you get a lot of these meta films, right? That are commenting upon the genre as they are examining the genre. Another good example of that type of film, which came out a year after this one, is RoboCop, right? Which is a great example of a really violent, like action sci-fi movie, but it's also satirizing those types of movies and like the, just like the bloodlust and the insanity of them, right? This movie is a really, really funny like deconstruction of the tropes of the slasher movie. There's a really good part towards the beginning of this movie. This is not really a spoiler, where these two people are in a car and they're like stuck in the mud, and then like Jason kind of wanders, upon them, and one of them is like, "We should get out of here." And they're like, "Oh well, maybe he'll go away." And the other guy's like, "I've seen enough horror movies to know that a guy with a giant knife wearing a hockey mask is never here for a good reason." Like I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact dialogue. But it's like the characters are aware of the ridiculousness of the situations, but the movie doesn't treat it as parody. Like it's not so self-aware that it becomes like Scary Movie, or something like that. It works really well as a slasher film, and yet is very, very funny and self-aware. And this movie has one of the best edits for me personally in any horror movie ever, where it cuts from a shot of a hamster spinning in a wheel to a little kid in excuse me, in Camp Crystal Lake, right? Like in one of the cabins, lying in a bed with a copy of No Exit, the Sartre play. It's just the funniness of that kills me every time. It's just such a clever, like little visual thing that they sneak in there. And I love this movie. And this is the first one I saw. This is the one that I saw when I was a little kid that left that really strong impression upon me. And then I revisited it again and again, like teenager, adult, like in my 20s. I watched it just a couple years ago. Every time I watch it, it's still really, really, really good. And I just love this movie. And it's, like the Jason movies to me really do define the slasher. I know that Halloween, like I said, Halloween came first. I would argue the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are the most innovative of them, of the kind of slasher films that I've seen personally. Although the Hellraiser films are, I don't know if Hellraiser movies count as slasher movies. If they do, let me know in the comments. I kind of don't think they do, but maybe they do. Those are obviously very innovative and unique and original too. But I love the Friday the 13th movies, the Jason movies, whatever you want to call it. So my name is Will, and that is my ranking of the Friday the 13th franchise. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you liked this video, and we'll see you next time.